The views and opinions of our guests are personal and do not represent those of their institutions or Applied Prevention Science International.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to APSI's Prevention Talks. Today, we are really pleased to introduce Dr. William Crano, who is a media expert and a longtime colleague of ours, and he's a current member of our scientific advisory group. For those of you who've been following us, you know that these talks have been produced to highlight a broad spectrum of prevention issues. We have discussed the culture of prevention and what has to be achieved in order to support public health prevention efforts, which is very timely. Dr. Doug Coatsworth from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville Center for Behavioral Health Research discussed how to address the stresses of COVID on parenting. And Dr. Rebecca Hirsch from George Mason University talked about stress in the workplace. Then we had Peter Wyman and Chelsea Keller-Elliott and Brian Yates, all from the University of Rochester School of Medicine, talking about the prevention of suicide. And last month, Dr. Daniel Flannery and Bobby Beal discussed their work at the Begin Center for Violence Prevention, Research and Education, and they were from Case Western Reserve. We have a number of other interesting talks coming up over the next couple of months. We're trying to schedule once a month, and right now we're almost filled up for the year, right, Maria? Yep. So today we're going to be hearing about the science of communication and how that science provides a framework for evidence-based media prevention programming, which can support community-based prevention interventions and policies, as well as other interventions that are going on. I'm going to now turn the program over to our Vice President, Susan David, who we've had a long relationship, many years from our time at NIDA together. And her background has been focused on communications. She worked at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and she and I were building our communications research program together. So let me turn this over to Susan.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Zilly. It's really a pleasure to welcome Dr. William Crano today. Dr. Crano is professor of psychology at Claremont Graduate University in Claremont, California. His basic research is concerned with social influence, especially the impact of minorities on the beliefs and actions of the majority, and on the effects of self-interest on attitudes and actions. His applied research is concerned with the development of persuasive and instructional information to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS and to prevent drug abuse in children and adolescents. I invite you to look at his full resume on our webpage, on the Prevention Talk webpage. First, a couple of housekeeping issues. I think you might have seen the announcement that we are recording the session. As Zilly had mentioned, some of our other prevention talks, all of them are recorded, so they can be viewed at any time. Another issue, we try to make this informal. We try to make it a discussion. It's a talk. And so we welcome your comments either in the chat or speaking up as we get into real discussions or issues. We also appreciate seeing you. As we mentioned, it kind of enlivens ourselves as we go back and forth and think about things. And of course, this is a communications concept. That's what we're all here for. To provide a bit of background, to expand a bit, Zilly and I met Bill in the early days when we were working at NIDA in the late 1990s. At the time, we were trying to build a research portfolio on communications. This was kind of near and dear to my heart. I had been public affairs director at NIDA, so I had some experience in campaigning and message development and so on. But I always wondered what makes the difference? What's the right message? What's the right audience? How do we do that well? and it was always a challenge. And so Zilly let me join her so that we could develop some research in the area. Bill and his colleagues at Claremont were one of our first grantees. And you'll be hearing some of the results of that work soon. So we're here to talk about effective messaging and how to do it. And I give you William Crano, our resident expert today, and thank him for joining us. Thanks, Bill.
I better unmute myself. It's nice to be here, and thanks for the intro. Yeah, I want to more or less get right into what we're going to talk about today, because I think I'm going to be a little bit long, and Zilly told me she'd cut me off after 10 minutes. So let's get started. Let's share this. All right. Slideshow. All right. As you see, this is the title of my talk. I won't read it for you. I know everyone here can read, so we'll go on to the second slide. Here's our ruling principle: prevention almost always requires persuasion. Anytime you're asking someone to do something they don't want to do, or not to do something they do want to do, this to me is a classic persuasion context. And this is what we're, this is how we approach any kind of messaging that we try to do, especially in terms of prevention, which is really what we've been focused on for a long time, since the 90s. And also, not just that, but we've also more or less focused on youth, that is adolescents, and also young adults. If you're a kind of an older adult like me, you're as far as we're concerned, you're on your own. Do what you want, and you should know better. Okay, here's some background findings and assumptions. Success in our field has been really sporadic, and it's been due to a couple of things. First of all, we seem to lack focus. If you look at a prevention ad today, or many of them, you wonder, what are they trying to get at? What's the fundamental question that they're doing? And it's really simple. It's how do you prevent someone from doing what they might want to do? We're dealing with prevention. That is, I don't know really how to get a person who's substance use dependent to stop. I can encourage them, I can sort of move them in that direction, but my success rate probably is going to be pretty bad. I want to get you before you start, which is why one of the reasons why we deal with youth typically. We know when kids start using drugs, and we go in before that and try and say, look, you really don't want to do this. This is a bad mistake. And at the moment, we're fighting all kinds of forces, including our own government, who's legalizing every damn drug that you can think of. Why does that happen? First of all, because of ignorance. People don't understand that this question of what are we trying to do involves persuasion, and a profound lack of knowledge about the theories and research that we've been researching in our field: communication, persuasion, social psychology. I'm a social psychologist, although I was head of a department of communication at Arizona for a number of years. There's a lack of knowledge of that work that goes all the way back. At least I date it back to the 50s. That's when I kind of placed the marker as this is really where everything really went well. And the other problem is hubris, which is I can avoid 70 years of research on persuasion and still succeed because I'm so smart. Here's the secret answer to that: you're not, unless you're really lucky. But luck is a funny, a tricky thing, and you don't bet your house on a whim like that. And also because there's been a relatively consistent focus on punishment in our field. If you do this, your ears will fall off, rather than on reinforcement. Those are all mistakes, and they ought not to be, and we know they are. You look at the history of what we've done over the years. Every time I go into a situation where someone in an administrative position in a nation or a state says, I've just been given this new job as prevention manager, and what I'm going to do, my plan is to scare the heck out of people and make them quit using drugs or never start. It'd be so awful and so ugly, so disgusting that they just will quit or not start. Really? I said, really? You know, that's been tried before. It doesn't work. And it doesn't work. And why do people think that? Well, because they don't know anything, right? It's not ill will. People are people of goodwill, but they don't know anything. And they somehow think that they can finesse lots of evidence. You can't. Here are the steps in persuasion that we've learned over the years. Get your audience to watch your message. This is hard with young kids sometimes because, hey, you're on the wrong medium. You throw a bunch of anti-marijuana TV ads on in a program designed to influence young adolescents, and guess what? Most of them never see your message because they're not watching TV. That's a mistake, right? You shouldn't do that. You induce people then to think about your message once you've got their attention. You present information that is difficult to counter-argue. That is to think in your head, oh no, that's nonsense. The message has to be strong. Strong means it's very, very difficult to sidestep it. You need to get buy-in and commitment to act. Not just, oh yeah, I think that guy's right. No, I think he's right. And actually I'm not going to do that. That's hard to do. And remember, I mean, we're under the impression sometimes in our field, good advertisers aren't, but in our field, sometimes we think, well, if we do this one presentation, if we buy this one ad and buy this one ad time, we're going to do that. And it's going to work and everybody's going to be saved. Yeah, right. It doesn't work. Media doesn't work like that. You got to really keep pounding it, pounding it in, and then you rinse and repeat. You keep doing it. And then you boost the message with effect with booster shots. We've had good success with that. You don't quit after your major campaign is over. Every now and then, maybe every week, every 2 weeks, you pop up with another message. Basically, that says, remember that thing you just recalled and that was so persuasive to you? That's still for real. Okay, so these are things that you need to do. And if you look at what goes on in a lot of prevention ads, they fail on every one of these things. Well, how are you going to persuade someone if you don't follow the rules? Okay, so you do that and not that. This is the major meme of the South Dakota anti-meth campaign. A bunch of kids who don't even shave yet. Meth, we're on it. You got old geezers in cowboy hats and stuff. I'm on meth. Well, okay, the idea is to get people saying, oh yeah, I'm on the problem. But the problem with this is that it invites memes that make fun of it. It trivializes the issue of methamphetamines, which is a really bad issue, a really dangerous drug. Don't be cute. Cute doesn't work here. So here's you get from communication and persuasion. This is back in 1943, which happened even before the birth of communication and persuasion in my mind. Okay, the old formula, I think came out in 1943 by Lasswell, I think. Who says what to whom, how, and with what effect? Well, with what effect I added. Who is the source? What do you got to do? You got to create a source who is credible. What does credible mean? According to Hublin, it means the person is an expert, really knows his stuff, or her stuff, and is trustworthy. Has nothing to gain by your going along with him or her, with the source, right? If you look at what our COVID messaging has been around the vaccine, you get Dr. Fauci on board, and he's talking about you got to get this shot, it's going to save you, and so forth. And yet we know in our country, in my country, incredibly, we have 20, 30, 40% of people who are saying, I'm not doing it in some of our states. Fauci goes in and says this. Now, Fauci has been demonized in a lot of those very places where you get the most resistance. He's a fraud. He's doing this. Is he an expert source? Yeah, even the right-wing things. Yeah, he sort of knows what he's talking about. But I don't trust him. He's in the pocket of the man. Okay, so Fauci, for the people who you most want to persuade, is not trustworthy, and hence not credible. And hence you still got a huge problem of what do they call them? Vaccine deniers or vaccine hesitants or stupid people. It takes all kinds of names. Okay, the what in the old formula? What is the message? That's why we're here today. Who's the audience? You got to match the message with the audience. If you don't, forget about it. And the medium, that's just the how. Okay, and finally, the effect, did it work? Which certainly the federal agencies are more and more and more interested in, and have been since the great Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson, when he was pumping a whole lot of dough into different things, and people wanted to know, is this worth it? Does it work? That's good. I think that's a good thing, and I'm willing to play in that game. Okay, our answer to the what is the EQUIP model. What is it? Well, what the EQUIP model does is to try to integrate critical media and persuasion requirements. It tries to put those two different forms, different fields together, and they are different. It really tries to highlight what you need to do in a message. How do you construct a message that actually will work? And it's based on about 70 years of strong evidence-based research, which is sort of where I started beginning the process, in my mind. There are others, obviously, great researchers before that who did some amazing things, and I refer to them too in my thinking, in my work. But this is really where it got experimental and got hard evidence going for it. We got a lot of this in our media-based prevention interventions. This is one of the older manuals that we wrote in my group, and I think it's as good as it gets. So what's the EQUIP model? EQUIP is an acronym. It stands for the various components of a message that you have to have. And if you don't have it, you probably won't succeed unless you're very, very, very lucky. And again, you don't want to depend on luck to be effective. As I said, it's an acronym like NATO or radar or laser. All of those things suggest certain things. And here's what those pieces of the puzzle mean. And I'll elaborate it a little bit on the next slide. But basically, EQUIP means engage, question, undermine, inform, and persuade. Those are the components that you better think about when you're creating a persuasive message, because if you don't, the odds are against your success. All of this is based on things that we've been studying very hard since the 50s, and that have a wealth of information on it. When I created this model, I was doing a meta-analysis of 70 years of research. But since I was more or less there while all of this was happening, it wasn't as hard as you might think it was. Okay, so what is it? What does engage mean? It means you got to attract attention to your ad. You can't have a boring ad and people do much for you. And you got to maintain attention of the audience throughout the ad, throughout the message. Message ad, I'm using those words as the same word, sorry. Question. This comes out of Hovland's shop back in the 50s. The first thing that your message has to do is raise a question in the minds of the receiver. Are you sure that marijuana doesn't hurt you? Simple question. It's not an argument. It's just raise a question. Why is that? Because in our work on attitudes, what we found is, at least in young people, I don't know if it works with old geezers like me, but with young people, many of them bolster a belief because they think everybody believes the same thing. The question introduces some small degree of doubt that maybe that isn't true. What? You mean somebody actually doesn't think that? And then you undermine that. You destabilize the existing belief by saying, well, gee whiz, there are a lot of people who think otherwise. And then you inform them. These undermine and inform are more or less one of a piece. You destabilize the existing information with very strong information that is an attempt to replace the existing belief. It's strong information in the sense, what I mean by strong is that it is very hard to argue against it, okay? Which means your source has to be credible. Your information has to be not just, my Uncle Harry thinks this. I mean, who cares what Uncle Harry thinks? How about the major research arm of the US government has found this? Well, that's pretty hard to argue against. And finally, persuade. And this is part of the tricky part. This means you have to know something about the field. We say provide incentives for agreement with your message. And by that, we use misdirection, which means I'm talking to this audience, but actually I'm trying to get the other one who's listening in and not defending itself against it, okay? I'm using vested interest. That is, I show why it is in your best interest to do this. By vested interest, it means a special thing in my theory, which is you consider this issue very, very important, and it has an impact upon your life. That's vested. And attitudes that are highly vested usually predict action. Okay. Here's some additional pieces of advice. Fear-arousing ads usually fail. They fail because they, A, are incredible, they're over the top. B, they use information that people don't believe. That is, they present it in such a way that they don't believe. We have an anti-meth campaign that's been going on for years and years and years. You show these horrible pictures of people on meth who, and they're true, of course. You stay on meth for a couple of years, you're going to look like this. You know, you are going to be scratching your skin and your teeth are going to be falling out. All this is true. But if I'm a kid sitting in high school and I know my friend next to me uses meth most weekends, and he looks just fine, he's doing fine in school, and so I'm not going to believe a word of that stuff, because it takes a while for the drug, for many people, sometimes it's instantaneous, for the drug really to become very, very a major part of your life, a bad part of your life. Unbelievable ads usually fail, which is part of the fear arousal stuff and part of other ads that we create. Exaggerated ads fail. People know when you're exaggerating. People know that, well, that's not going to happen. How many people do you know who talk through a voice box and then stick a cigarette in the hole in their throat and smoke? I mean, yeah, it's real. It's also, you know, in some ways something you don't want to watch, which gets back to engage. Do you really want to watch that ad more than once? I don't. I do because I have to present it sometimes, but it's not going to work. If I turn my head away, don't do disgusting ads. We don't like disgust. Whimsical ads usually fail. So, oh, this is cute and nice. Yeah, right. Okay, fine. Disgusting ads usually fail. You avoid them. And here's the kicker. Current failures result in reinforcing the established belief. So if I fail, if I'm trying to get you to not smoke cannabis anymore, if I fail, you're going to take comfort from that failure. And the better the ad is in your mind, the worse the failure is going to be, because it's a stronger reinforcement of what your belief is. For young adults, what does it mean? It means involve opinion leaders as message sources. Sometimes opinion leaders are parents, extremely strong opinion leaders. Kid is the opinion follower, believe it or not. But you better pick it carefully, because Fauci is not an opinion leader for, I don't know, 25% of the country. I love Fauci. I think he's great. Anything he says, I do. But, you know, that puts me in the majority of the US population, but there's a big minority that we got to get fixed. And then try to create a norm of abstinence. It doesn't mean you have to go through into a school and persuade every kid in the school not to use drugs. If you get a norm going where the behavior is non-normative, where it's like, well, what are you smoking that cigarette for? What's going on? That stinks. That makes a big difference. Okay. So I'm going to quit now. And you know, Zilly, I don't know if I took too long. I probably did. But if you have questions, let me know. If you have other questions later on, you can email me. I'll probably respond. And it won't be because I ignore you. If I don't, it's because I'm really bad at keeping up with my email. But anyway, if you have questions, or Susan, if you do, let me know.
I was trying to unmute myself. I just thought to kick off some questions, and we need to look at the chats and see if we have any. But one of the things that, as I reviewed some of the work, I wondered about a lot, and I thought maybe you could speak to a bit, is you reference understanding the audience. I mean, what kinds of ways? I always felt that is absolutely critical. Who is the audience? What do we need to know, and why is that important, and how does that integrate with EQUIP?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I mean, you've got to aim your message at the audience. I can't make a highly intellectual ad for people who are not. I can't use language that doesn't work. I can't do all sorts of things, you know, that just doesn't do the trick. So I'm trying to figure out how to get this slide stuff off the screen. So yeah, I mean, it's all of this really takes. Oh, don't do that. Don't do Okay. All of this takes some degree of okay, you don't know. Anyway, this is not me. All of this takes a real focus on what is it doing? What language am I using? What is my audience? Is the audience, who's my source? Is the source relevant to the audience? Do they care about Fauci? Do they care about this other person? This is why I really advocate strongly in my work that we don't use the sort of generic voiceover ads, because nobody knows. There we go. That's what I want. Nobody knows who's the source. Don't use drugs. What the hell does that mean? I mean, yeah, okay, but who's saying it? Just because you have a deep voice doesn't mean you know anything. Okay, so don't use voiceover. Use a take a chance. Create a source. Figure out who your audience is. And that brings us to another point. Who is your audience? If you think, well, this is a generic ad, it's going to go to everybody. Yeah, maybe, probably not. Right? The audiences that we deal with today are too fractionated, and so we really figure out, okay, who is it? Who are we aiming this at? Who do we really want to focus on? What is the drug that we're using that we're trying to force people off of? In some of the work that we did very early with Susan and Zilly for NIDA, we had a nationally representative survey, a panel study, 4 years, thousands of kids and their parents, amazing data. And what we found was you could the field typically differentiates among user types. Here's an experimenter, and Marty Fishbein used to use that a lot. Here's a person who just dabbles. Here's a person who uses on weekends. Here's a person who's using fairly regularly. Here's a person who's hopelessly dependent upon the drugs. Okay, so they make these fine gradations on users. How about non-users? Well, there are non-users. What? No, there are all kinds of non-users. There are some non-users who say, I haven't used, and I will never use this drug. Okay. Or you have some people who say, I haven't used yet. Okay. Those are two very different answers. And when we parsed on that, what we found was something very interesting, which was we took that national sample of all of the people who said, I've never used marijuana, or cannabis. That was the drug that was mostly focused in this national youth anti-drug media campaign. This started in Clinton's time and carried all the way through Bush too, and beyond. Well, then we parse those people farther in terms of who, what do you mean by you've never used? I mean, does it mean you never will, or does it mean you refuse to say I definitely won't? Okay. That was the break point. We got that from tobacco research. What we found is that after we called these different people, we called one group resolute non-users. They're non-users and they're strong about it. I'm never going to do this stuff. And the other people we called vulnerable. Notice that we didn't break vulnerability or at-risk people in terms of race or SES or parents' education, any of that stuff. That's nonsense. What you break on is what is the tendency of that person to be looking at these drugs and saying, they're kind of interesting. I might do that someday. I don't know. I'm not now, but maybe I will. Those people at the end of the 4-year study, about 2/3 of them were using marijuana. Yeah. With and they jumped from year 1 to year 2 in this panel study from 0% usage to about, I forget the numbers now, about 20%, 25, 24, 25% of them were using after the first year. The resolute non-users went from 0% to about 10% usage after the first year. Okay, they were resolute, but they said, I'm never going to do this, and they lied. They didn't lie, but I mean, they succumbed. But not by much. 90% of them didn't. Okay, and by the 4th year, it was still relatively low levels of usage for those people. And remember, they were getting older every year, and this was a group of 12 to 18-year-olds. So some of those kids were old, 16, 17, 18. they would grow. The drift toward usage in youth is very strong, and we've done some interesting research. If you're interested in ambivalence toward drugs, toward drug use, and as it turns out, as time goes by, at least in the United States, ambivalence about drug use gets more and more. First of all, the attitude is non-ambivalent for many young little kids. I will never do that. What are you creating? I won't do that. But as they get older, the drift is toward greater ambivalence, and eventually the ambivalence has to resolve itself, and it resolves itself by saying, the hell with it, I'm going to use this. Ambivalence is, on one hand, I should do it. On one hand, I shouldn't do it. Eventually that goes away. So what we try to do is go in, just as using Hovland's ideas of opinions. We think an ambivalent attitude is made up of positive and negative opinions toward, let's say, the drug. So be quiet, please. And what we try to do is go in and take away the pro-drug opinions out of the attitude. What's that leave? It leaves a less ambivalent attitude that is more negative toward drug use. And it worked. We failed in one case. We got the reverse effects when we tried one tactic. We tested out 3 different tactics that the literature said this should work. In one case, it did nothing. In one case, it worked oppositely, but in the other case, it worked like a charm. So now we know what we're doing, or what we think we're doing, and we're chasing that one down pretty hard.
We have several comments in the chat. Susan, did you want to read those? Or?
I was trying to catch up with them.
Oh, okay. Why don't you start? We can start with Laurie Palin. She wrote, here are a couple of my favorite audience analysis tools: Duarte Audience Need Map, and she has a reference, Audience Characteristics and Behavioral Factors Template. So she's put that out. Bill, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
No, I think the more, one of the things I'm just pushing is that we learn who our audience is and what they feel like, what they think. I don't use those tools, but I may after, when we get smart people recommending them. So you're going to give me these chats at the end, right?
Yes.
A copy of them. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I like them. There are others that allow us to do that. What we do before we go into a field is we take representatives from that field, randomly grab them, and start asking them questions. What do you think? What's going on? What's happening in your school, and so forth? We show them some of our mock-ups of the presentations we're going to do, and then we say, well, what does this ad say? What's this message? And a lot of times, old geezers like me totally misread the teenage mind. It's like they give me an interpretation of a message that is like absolutely wrong. It's like, oh man, and they're not wrong, it's us.
It's not only you, Bill, it's a lot of people in the field, as many of us in the prevention field for a long time know that there are people who think they know what the message should be, and they don't test it out in focus groups.
Yeah.
And I know when you have longer trainings, you emphasize the importance of the focus groups. And I think that's a huge message to people for us in the field. Rick Brown had a comment. He said, "Hi, Bill, great presentation. Thanks.
Thanks,
Rick. Do you have or could point us to a really good example of a prevention media message that is out there in the public domain? I would like to have an example to share with my students." And if you don't have something to present, perhaps we can send it to everybody afterwards, Bill.
Yes, I have some. I just did a talk the other day where they wanted just the ones that succeeded. Took me a while to find them, but yes, of course. If you give me the reminder, I'll be happy to send you.
We'll send you a reminder, Bill.
Okay, thanks.
And we have everybody's email, right, Maria? So we can get back in touch with everybody. Great. Zach McDaniel writes, "Are you familiar with the Frameworks Institute? Their concept of leading with a value statement and focusing on causes rather than effects, explanatory change, etc. Can the EQUIP model effectively align with a message design with those things in mind?" Sorry if that didn't make any sense. And I'm gonna laugh, haha.
I'm not familiar with it, but from what you told me, I don't see why it wouldn't. I mean, it wouldn't do violence to the idea as to what you need to do. What you've told me is that is the framework Institute is using. This is the substantive argument that we're making. What the EQUIP says is this is the form, this is the format. This is how you do it. It's nothing but a recipe book, or not even a book. A recipe. But yeah, the answer is yeah, I think so.
Okay. We have another comment from Dr. Kamil Krishna Banik. I hope I pronounced his name right. We are on a journey. In short span of life should be kept anything else as a token for the next generation by filling up information, education, and communication.
I don't know what the question is, but I agree with the statement.
Good point.
It's exactly what we ought to be doing. I mean, we people, the society spent a great deal on our educations, right? And as Campbell used to say, you think they're doing that for nothing? You think you can continue to do what you want to do and not worry about the contribution that you're making to that you're paying back? I agree with that, and that's what I mean, the older I get, the more important that becomes, is to make that, is the payback. So that's what I'm trying to do, among other things.
Okay.
And have fun.
Let's see.
Oh, that's a good.
We got quite a number.
I know,
Keep
there's a
coming
lot.
in.
I'll pick up. You want me to read the next?
Well, Dr. Campbell had also a couple of other comments. So I don't know if we want to, let me just say the next one is, he says, someone comes and goes for the few moments to lead, to display his classical creation, to uphold the dignity of education. I love that.
I like it.
He also says, get vaccinated, everyone. Everywhere vaccine bring us closer, pioneering role model against NCOV, apparently COVID-19 pandemic situation. So thank you for that. Those comments, I think that's important. Lori, do you want to read Lori's next comment, which is, I know this presentation is focused.
Oh, yeah. I know this presentation is focused on media campaigns, but I think it's important to keep this in mind for all communications. For example, conference presentations, journal articles, or a presentation like we're doing today. We often don't think enough about the audience and the purpose of communications. We should always develop our communications with an eye toward what we want the reader attendee to do afterward.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. That is exactly right. This isn't, I mean, the context today is media-based prevention, but to me, media means a whole lot of things. It could mean a poster in the classroom, right? It's something that is communicating to a lot of people, a lot of kids in this case, or a billboard. Okay, it doesn't have to be a TV ad or a radio spot or even something on the internet where you're continuously trying to change people's minds. It can be anything. It could be used in an argument with your wife, unless she knows about the theory. In which case it doesn't work.
Oh, here's a question for you. You'll love from Doug Murakami. Dr. Crano, you mentioned we know when kids start, we want to come in ahead of this. I'd like to hear your thoughts on parent-focused messages. How strong is parental influence?
Oh my God. Yeah, I love that. We've had years of research on this, and every time we do, what we find is that parents who monitor their kids and are warm. By that, I mean, they have a good relationship with the child will self-disclose. That level of warmth is that much. So essentially, you don't need monitoring. You do it anyway, but you don't need it because the kid is going to tell you what they're trying to do or what they're thinking about or who they're with and so forth. My son, my younger son, was very self-disclosive to us, especially to his mother, and it's ideal because he would actually listen to what we had to say and most of the time do what we expected and hoped. One day he comes in and discloses something to her that is he didn't really have to, and it wasn't terribly useful for us. And what she said to him was, Brian, if you if you keep talking to me about this kind of stuff like this, I'm going to tell you what Daddy and I did last night. And that sort of put a little bit of a boundary on what the kid would say, but at least in important ways, it made a good, it was very useful. So, you know, some of our Swedish colleagues have done some really good research on parental monitoring. It really works. We also found out that when we presented a persuasive message to kids, but couched it as, parents, this is something you should know, on a TV ad that we had created, and they did it inside the schools, versus another group, randomly chosen group of kids who was, students, this is what you should know. We'd been called in to deal with an inhalant misuse problem in the schools. They were scared to death that one of these kids were going to kill themselves with this stuff. The inhalants are a huge problem. And you know, about 10% of the population, almost all young kids, who can't get a hold of marijuana, they'll use other stuff to get high. And it could be almost anything. And the problem is, if it's the wrong stuff, it lights up a different part of your brain, and sometimes you forget to breathe. And that's what causes sudden sniffing syndrome death, which is a catastrophe, obviously, for the families and for the communities in which it occurs. And what we found most effective was the message that was aimed supposedly at the parents. So if you create ads that are aimed at parents, there's a good chance the kids are going to be listening to them as well if they're on the same medium. And sometimes they aren't. But if that's the case, they're not going to counter argue. They're not going to resist as hard. Why should they? Why should I resist the message you're giving to my mother? It doesn't matter to me, right? And that's the essence of what we're trying to do in persuasion. We're trying to get the message into your head before you have time to counter it, to resist. Once it's in there, I got you. I mean, I don't care what you think about later. It's going to come back and haunt you. Yeah. So that's what we try to do in our ads. It sounds nefarious, but it isn't. It comes from an understanding of how your head works. Spinoza was right, as it turns out, and Descartes was wrong. Spinoza said, well, when something comes in, our first response is to accept and then think about it and reject if it needs rejecting. Descartes said our first response, it was French, is to deny and then think about it and maybe accept later. Research that Dan Gilbert from Harvard has done suggests no, Descartes was incorrect in that actually the approach, the process that we use as humans is accept and then later deny. That's why distraction works in persuasion. If I present an ad under distracting circumstances, first of all, it's harder to counter argue. And second, what that means is the ad gets in, you can't really counter argue very much. And then the distraction is such that you don't have time to, a cognitive capacity to go back and counter it. So you're stuck. Yeah. And that works too. Petty and Cassiopos and a bunch of other people in the Ohio State group showed that in a beautiful piece of work.
And now we have some comments from old friends. Hi, Richard. Richard Kagunti wrote, how has the pandemic affected media campaigns and effective messaging in view of the restricted space? How do you see this affecting proven EBIs and messaging? I guess meaning that it's true, everything's all COVID all the time, and we all have to find our space. What do you think about that?
It's very difficult. I mean, we were doing a lot of stuff online to begin with, so it didn't hurt it didn't get in the way of what we were doing very much. But in fact, we have a program that has been funded by the State Department for a number of years, where we're training people from overseas to create message-based communications. It's an intense program, 3 weeks of lectures and dealing with me for a while, and then going through the whole book, the green book that that you guys put out and that we worked on, and then coming back again with projects that they're ready to implement in their countries. We've done it for 3 years now, and just finished the third year. And what happens is these young people, not some of them not so young, go back into their jobs in media-based persuasion. Basically, that's their jobs for most of them. And we had some people from Barbados who had a really gorgeous study ready to go. They get in the field, COVID hits, that's it. Everything they did for the past year or so has been taking their skills in persuasion and putting it into, and COVID relevant ads. So it's taken a toll in terms of, and probably should have, in terms of what kind of money is available to do the work. I mean, when you got a fire, you're not going to be, you want a fire hose, you don't want to treat us on fire. It's like it's not relevant or useful at the time. So yeah, it's hurt us in terms of forward progress. It hasn't hurt my shop so much because we're still doing our thing, but it did impinge in the sense that a lot of the stuff that we really wanted to do in a face-to-face context, we were forced into going online, and some schools didn't have the wherewithal that their kids could do it.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, so we put that on hold for a while. So we got a couple of programs on hold now that I think are really hot and maybe very useful, and also focusing on some of the work that we've done. By the way, Zilly, I have a scoring sheet, not a sheet, it's kind of a treatise on how you score ads. And I'll be happy to send it to you, and you can distribute if you want. But it also talks about some other things that we think are part and parcel. One of them we call vested interest, which has to do with the importance and hedonic relevance to people in changing ads. We change attitudes. Nobody's interested in that, except if the attitude impinges on the actions. And that's what we're trying. And we've shown that this vested interest idea makes a gigantic difference. So that's part of the ad that you need to do. You have to show in your message that this affects your life, and it is important. Your life is important.
Allie's comment. Extremely enlightening presentation. As usual, Dr. Crano, what are your thoughts on targeted media campaigns, say one for school children and one for their parents?
I like them. I think both work on both audiences. You can't, targeting parents, as I've said, if the kids are first of all, targeting, yes, okay, do it. Don't just throw something out there to everybody. It doesn't work. If you can tailor, it's even better. If you can tailor, what we are doing now is trying to find out, based on theory, what are 2 or 3 variables that really matter. We measure people on that, usually in the same run. We've written smart programs where on the basis of those characteristics, we pipe the kids specific kinds of ads versus not, and we find that the tailored ads that really focus on your susceptibilities make a hell of a big difference, as you would guess.
Yeah.
But all it takes is the theory has to be right. If it isn't, then you're off base and it doesn't work. But yeah, of course, yeah, tailoring and targeting are exceptionally important. There's no question about it in the literature. If you want to read somebody, read Noor, N-O-A-R. He's really good at this. He's at, I think, North Carolina, and he's done wonderful work.
Thank you. And Aisha Sadiqa from Pakistan, another old friend, thanks us all for it. In my country, media has strong impact on audience and a major tool for opinion building. I worked on media prevention for a year on behalf of government, but it isn't much effective. My question is, what can be more effective strategy, especially with reference to developing countries? Do we need to think differently in developing countries while working on media prevention? How significant is media prevention for parents and teachers?
Aisha, first of all, thank you. I have 2 Fulbright students coming to work with me in graduate school for 4 years, 5 years, I don't know how long it takes, from Pakistan. So I know what I'm going to be teaching them so that they can bring back there. The reason why I bet, and I know nothing about what you did there or what was done there, I bet they didn't follow any of the principles that I've been talking about today, or at least not all of them, or not enough of them. And you make one mistake and you can blow the whole thing up. So I wouldn't give up on it. Media is nothing more than a medium. I mean, it's the messages that matter, right? The medium is how you can get the message delivered to the right right groups, the right populations, subpopulations. Okay, so you can make a mistake there. You can use a medium that people who you want to persuade don't use or don't pay much attention to. Or if you succeed in that, you can get it to the right people. Maybe the ad is not good. Maybe it doesn't follow the principles that I've been talking about for the last 10 years, but for the last few minutes here. So yeah, I mean, my argument would be, without even seeing your ads, I bet they're not very good.
Next one will be near and dear to your heart.
That, right?
How do you measure and evaluate media campaigns for effectiveness?
Oh, that's a really nice question. It's a very hard one, but it can be done. Some campaigns you can if you're worrying about something at a population level or at a school level, let's say a school, you can look at truancy, you can look at number of kids who drop out, who quit, percentage of kids who graduate, a percentage of kids who get arrested for illicit drug use. Lots of things like that at a more global level. And of course, you can do surveys of those kids, really to test out what they're thinking, what they're doing, what they're using. And we've found, we've done validity checks on a lot of self-reports at this time, and they're amazingly accurate. I mean, I can't imagine as a kid, when I was a kid, if someone said, have you used this thing? And I can't imagine telling them the truth if it would get me into trouble. But some of the kids, to me, when we talk to them in our focus groups beforehand, are admitting to felonious behavior. I mean, yeah, I use that. In fact, I sell some to my friends. What? You can't do that. Stop doing that. So, you know, I'm amazed at the apparent honesty of our kids. Maybe some of them are lying, but boy, you know, as a rule, that isn't true. So you can surveys, you can do all sorts of things. Societal indicators. If you've got a media campaign going, you might look at number of hits, number of calls to helplines or to info lines, things like that. Those are all good. Those are good data. They're a little bit soft, but those sorts of things will imply that usage is being affected. And it's not hard to do. I mean, every context has a way of measuring outcomes that fit the context. So, and all you got to do is think hard about it, and then get the wherewithal to do it. That's the problem. I mean, what the real question is, where do we get the money to do these evaluations? And sometimes they're cheap, but a lot of times they're not. And what I've found in many cases, even in our grants, is that we got a promise to do the evaluations, but there's never any money behind it. Okay, well, we'll give you for this, but this other stuff, you know, you just do it. It's expected.
And that's not unusual. I mean,
No,
I think
it's not unusual at all.
people want to pay for the program. They don't want to pay for the evaluation.
I have yes, a dear friend of mine has been running an NGO for the past 25 years. And he was a student of mine. And I keep arguing with him, Gary, you got to do evaluations. These programs are really wonderful. You can sell it to the feds. You can sell it to anybody if you have data. I'm not spending a dime on that, on evaluations if it's going to take away from programs. I've had 2 successful encounters of this type with him over 25 years. And the other 200, I failed. I can't do it, or he won't do it. He's the hardest headed guy. But then so am I. But yeah, I mean, the issue is you have to somehow work out ways of getting funding to do that sort of thing, because it is expensive. Some evaluations are more expensive than the darn program. The evaluation of the National Youth
I know about that.
Campaign, that was, I think, $56 million.
Yes, it was.
Penny. The campaign itself stunk, but the evaluation was.
The evaluation was, yeah.
We learned a lot from that.
We sure did.
I also would like, before we close, to emphasize that media campaigns in and of themselves will not do the job. And I think we really need to underscore how do we integrate the campaigns with what is going on the ground, which are hopefully will be evidence-based interventions.
Yeah, this is one of the many strengths of media campaigns, that they can knit together other things that are happening
Yes.
in the community. So you can have the campaign going and also tying in partners. Oh, and here's the hotline for suicide prevention. And here's the group that's working on this. The meeting is such and such and this and that. I mean, media gets to people. There's no question of that. And it can integrate efforts if you've got cooperative people, or if you've got a sort of a centralized prevention system, which many countries do. Use the media to tie together all of the various things that you're doing. Can you then evaluate and say, well, the media is responsible for this? No, who cares? You got the effects. You know, you don't need the credit. Just get the job done.
Yeah, that's really important. Well, we're coming up on the hour. Maria, did you want to remind people of what's coming up in our prevention talks?
Yes, actually, I was putting it in the chat, but it's easier this way. So in August 12th, we have Dr. Hendrix Brown from Northwestern University, who will be talking about scaling out prevention programs. And then for September 9, we have Dr. Felipe Castro from Arizona State University, and he will be talking about cultural adaptation, which is something that we are always talking about, same as scaling out in our trainings and in our different nuggets and talks. Thank you all very much for coming, for attending. We hope to see you in the next ones. I think we won't have a prevention talk for July. We're just taking a little break because there's a lot of things coming up for next semester. And we could say it's almost the end of the year already. And thank you, Bill, so much for always an enlightening and captivating talk. I mean, just listening to you is just
Yeah, we could
amazing.
go on.
It's
Great
always
questions.
an experience.
Great questions and great comments.
Yes.
I wish we had
Great
another hour.
Yeah, I know, and everyone, your participation has been amazing. Thank you so
Yes.
much. And Zilly, Susan, as always, you're the best. Shelley, thank you for putting
Thanks
it
very
together.
much. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you to
guys.
Shelley.
Thank you all. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
coming. Great to see you.
Bye, everyone.
Wonderful to see you.
Bye,
Dr.
all.
Good to see you.
Bye, everyone.
Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, you won't be able to avoid it.